the expansive medium of anime and manga, there are hundreds and thousands of different types of stories. Some very bright and cheerful, pushing a theme that is uplifting and motivating to some. Other stories take a bit of a darker route, deciding to show the sadder side of humanity and push a heavy yet important world truth. And then there are some manga that's purpose is to show nothing but the true potential, violence, and utter brutality of the human condition. And one such manga is Juujika no Rokunin. This manga centers around the revenge of our main character Uruma Shun. After being bullied to near death as a kid, having his parents murdered, and his brother crippled by his childhood bullies, Uruma resorts to attempting to kill these said bullies at the young age of 12 in order to get revenge and closure for his family. Before doing this and inevitably getting arrested, his veteran grandfather interferes and for the next 3 years teaches Uruma the ways of a killer and gives him the knowledge and the spine to take a human life. And this is truly where the story of Juujika no Rokunin starts. Now, if you are planning to read this manga, I think it is best for you to consume it on your own and in the experience intended for you to consume it by the mangaka. I will say, however, that this manga is extremely visceral, stomach churning, and somewhat nauseating. And while I do think that the story is entertaining and it does show a little bit of just really the disgusting nature that a human person can have, I can't just recommend this manga for anyone. And if you consider yourself relatively faint of heart, do not under any circumstances read this manga. Not only is it fairly triggering for some genuinely traumatic things and traumatic experiences, but is extremely violent and explicit in its nature. From this point in the video forward, I'm going to assume that you are okay with any of the things that I just talked about, so keep that in mind as I move forward and kind of break down the manga in a little bit. In any case, what this series does, it does extremely well. The art style is extremely rough and sketch-like. And with this rough and very sketchy style, violence is conveyed in a very up-close and personal manner. In something as early as the first chapter, we see extreme violence and lack of care from the mangaka to hold back, and they just really lean into the violence and gore of the series. What makes this violence, what makes this gore, what makes this kind of visceral nature even more of those things is the fact that literal children, 5th graders, are committing acts of massive violence. It's something that feels a bit more gut-wrenching than seeing someone older looking doing such things, and as such the series functions to grab your attention with it rather quickly. Now, whether or not this is for you, that is a different story that you have to address for yourself personally, but it is undoubtedly correct that if this story is up your alley or you have an itch for some reason to read this type of manga, it is very good at grabbing your attention and wanting you to let Uruma get revenge. The expressions of these characters is also something that benefits from the very rough and fluid art style, and it allows for a massive range of motion for our characters. This fluidity of expression and facial structure leads to situations where expressions as tame as scowling can turn into something that sends a chill down both the character's spine and verse, and you, the readers. On top of that, due to this manga being very explicit in its detail, it is able to dive into every single gritty detail of the torture and vengeance that Uruma puts his previous bullies through. Now, just saying the manga is visceral and violent without giving a small example may just come off as me exaggerating and hyping this manga up because I myself may be squeamish. So let me detail one particular scene that, while disturbing, is tame in comparison to the many other gruesome and disgusting scenes that take place in this manga. Upon finding and capturing one of his childhood bullies, our main character strings that said bully up in an empty room. As this person is hanging in this room, Uruma details an interesting thing that he once saw in a movie. And as you hear him talking about cleaning up the mess that he's going to cause here, both you and his target start to get a sense of impending doom and sense of danger as you realize that something horrific is about to be committed. As the tension builds, Uruma pulls out a BB gun and shouts bang as he threatens to shoot his target in the eye. This is a callback to what this person did to him 3 years ago, with that same character hanging him up on a tree and shooting him with a BB gun multiple times in order to see his face contort and change in pain. This was back when the aggressor was the bully and our main character was the victim. You start to get a little bit of a clue as to how petty or how detail-oriented our main character is, as we see that the exact same model of BB gun that was used on him those 3 years ago is being used on our now victim of this torture and aggression and the bully as he's being strung up in this room. The tension continues to build as Uruma details exactly what would happen if he decided to pull the trigger and shoot him in the eye, saying how his eyeball might explode and he might go blind even. And the target breaks down into tears as he pleads for his life. But even this is drawn in a disgusting and revolting style that makes us see how vile this scene is on both ends. Unlike where many other manga where crying is something that gains sympathy, these tears are something of a disgusting creature that deserves no sympathy from us or the main character. Now, up to this point, the heat in this room has been building for a while, or at least the target has been saying so, and this is before the big reveal is shown through Uruma pointing a mirror at his victim. And when this is shown, we see that the first layer of skin has been peeled off, exposing the nerves and muscles to the open air, which is what resulted in his elevated sensitivity to the natural room temperature and the heat. As a byproduct of the peeling and his exposed nerves, the amount of pain that he feels from just even a simple touch is enough to make him scream out in agony and pain and feel as if he will die. But that alone is not enough for Uruma's revenge. So taking out the same model of gun that shot him as a kid, he fills his target with BBs until he suffocates on his own blood and fluids, dying hanging above the ground. All throughout this scene, there is a consistent sense of dread and lack of humanity that seems to linger. Even though you were once rooting for Uruma here, and even though you desperately wanted him to get his vengeance for what was done to his family, because of the explicit nature of the actual act itself, and because of almost how antagonistic our character seems, you can't help but feel dirty. Almost as if your own feelings of catharsis played a part into how disgusting and vile this method of death was. But soon, this feeling fades, and you once return to get drawn into the horrendous deeds of his target, and your thirst, and Uruma's thirst for revenge returns. Throughout this 26 chapter series, the form of violence gets more and more horrific, and the content more and more graphic. It delves into things that I can't even possibly begin to try to cover in depth in a YouTube video, seeing as how it gets extremely, extremely bad. And for a series as short as this, to dive into the most disgusting and dark parts of the human mind and do it in a way that somehow scratches the almost lizard brain part of our head, all while building up the quote-unquote villains to be worse than scum and deserving of these punishments, something that I think is relatively impressive. Not necessarily good, but impressive in a dark and twisted way. And I think when all these traits culminate into one series, it results in the most brutal revenge manga I've ever read. Juujika no Rokunin is a very interesting series in my mind. While I do think that many times it often lacks class per se in what it talks about and decides to feature in its manga, and a lot of times does really lean into showing off the blood and guts for the sake of showing blood and guts, when it catches its stride, I do truly think that it's extremely proficient in fulfilling the sort of revenge fantasy that many other stories do. This isn't something that I think is overly deep, or at least at this point in the story has an overarching theme that it needs to portray or show, although the idea of true justice is something that has been toyed with time and time again, and is obviously going to be delved more deeply into, seeing as how this series moves forward. But as of the time and recording of this video, Juujika no Rokunin is at its basic level a revenge fantasy, and a pretty gruesome one at that. If you are into those types of stories, it will work for you. But if you're not, and you're looking for something a little bit deeper in your revenge story, or a little bit deeper in your journey for justice, this is not a series I could recommend, because it really doesn't handle that well, at least not yet. Anyways, if you guys did enjoy this video, and would like to see me talk about Juujika Rokunin, or any other plethora of more niche anime and manga, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you are notified to when I upload. Links to other manga reviews and recommendations will be in the end screens and description below for you guys to enjoy at your own leisure. And in any case, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, this is Broken Ronin, signing off.